My name is Suzanne Elliott, and I'm the Canadian Exchange Officer here at the UK Foreign and Commonwealth Office in London. As a Foreign Service Officer in the management and consular stream, a typical posting abroad for me would involve managing a consular section at one of Canada's embassies, high commissions, or consulates abroad, delivering assistance to Canadians. But as an exchange officer, I'm here embedded in the FCO's Crisis Management Department, delivering crisis response for large-scale situations impacting British nationals overseas.
And my name is Alex Skinner. I work in Canada's Emergency Watch and Response Centre at Global Affairs Canada. I'm the British Exchange Officer here from the UK's Foreign and Commonwealth Office. And when I'm not responding to a crisis, I'm looking at emergency management policy and partnerships. So on the policy side, we might be looking at our evacuation policy or our policy on how we assist nationals in distress overseas. And then on the partnership side, we're looking at which countries we can work with, where we need partnerships to be able to help our nationals more effectively in a crisis. And then when a crisis does happen, I switch over to working on the response. So earlier this year, at the beginning of the year, you'll remember the tragic event of the Ukraine International Airlines flight coming down just outside of Tehran in Iran. And so I was working on that response at the start of the year. You may remember that both UK and Canadian nationals were on board that plane. And so I was in a role that looked at how we could work together to help both of our countries' nationals respond more efficiently and effectively to help the victims' families.
In January, as the world started to come to terms with the implications of COVID-19, Canada, the UK, and many countries chartered flights to be able to bring our citizens back from Wuhan after airspace closed and they became stranded.
So in late January, when it became evident that the pandemic was of a much more severe size and scale than we had expected, my mind was already focused on how we could cooperate, having been focused on that for the last few months on the Ukraine International Airways crash. And it meant that we could really look at how we work together when evacuating our nationals from Wuhan in China in the early days of the response, and then keep working together throughout the response to assist our nationals together.
I remember working an early shift at the Crisis Management Centre on February 9th. I was working the 6 to 2 shift, and I had the privilege of standing there shoulder to shoulder with my British colleagues, watching the second plane from Wuhan land at Bryce Norton on the screen. And it was a very proud moment for me, a proud moment because I felt I was among my peers. My colleagues at the FCO have embraced me here and treated me as one of their own. And proud as a Canadian to have contributed to helping our neighbours.
My role on the coronavirus response in particular started off leading the liaison team. That team was looking at how we worked with other government departments to respond together, but it was also looking at how we responded together internationally as well. I then moved over to lead the planning team, and this team was looking a few steps ahead in the response and trying to think strategically about what we might need next in the next phase of the response and planning for that. So we were looking at things like how would we assist our nationals once the repatriation flights stopped and people had chosen to remain overseas or were unable to return to either Canada or the UK. And then we were also looking at how we went about reopening our embassies and high commissions overseas so that people could access consular services face to face again.
It wasn't very long after Wuhan, though, that the FCO was in crisis again. This time to respond to British nationals stranded on cruise ships in Japan, off the coast of the US, and later in Cuba. And of course, there have been many other cases since then and many other flights successfully delivered, but those were events that I was particularly involved in. And we had hundreds of Canadians and hundreds of Brits on various ships. Occasionally, though, we also had pockets of Brits in ships with many more Canadians, or vice versa. And I was involved in one particular case where, thanks to the FCO, we were able to provide a solution for a small group of Canadians who wouldn't otherwise have had an easy solution. And thanks to the FCO, they were able to return to Canada via the UK. And that's not an ideal solution by any stretch of the imagination, but crisis, again, doesn't often lend itself to easy solutions.
And in crisis management departments, we're always testing and preparing and practicing for how we can work together and how we can be best prepared for the next response. And so one of the things I've done in this role was go to our 2 Canadian and British embassies in Amman in Jordan and run a joint crisis exercise with our 2 missions there to practice working together and seeing how we could coordinate on the ground. And that came in really useful during this response, because we can make suggestions to embassies as to what they could do together.
I think most of us practitioners recognize that while we're fulfilled by what we do and we're proud of what we do, we wouldn't be in the circumstance of helping if others weren't facing hardship. And so that's always a difficult context to work in. And so what I found particularly heartwarming throughout all of the COVID-19 responses has been the resilience and the goodwill and the gratitude of Canadians dealing with really challenging circumstances, in particular the small group assisted by the FCO, and vice versa. And I think that speaks to, again, our common values and the strength of our relationship.
And we've found the cooperation between the UK and Canada hugely beneficial, partly because we both have nationals across the globe in pretty much every country, and it allows us to look at whether the UK or Canada is best placed to be able to help those nationals most quickly and effectively in an emergency, and to get there before the other country might be able to do so.
In crisis, time and resources are always at a premium. And so I think the relationship to cooperate is essential to make the most of limited resources, to pool knowledge in order to deliver results more quickly. And certainly through the many, many hours that I've worked in the Crisis Centre at the FCO, alongside virtually my colleague Alex in Ottawa, doing very much the same, I'm confident that our roles have helped to deliver results for Canadians and British nationals, and that will continue to do so through this COVID-19 response.